Did you know that Africa has 60% of the world's uncultivated agricultural land? It's true. Agriculture is the biggest industry in Africa, with over 80% of working-age people in some countries working in this sector. So why is food security so low in Africa, and why do they import so much food? And why did food prices spike after the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022? Sub-Saharan Africa has an abundance of arable land, an abundance of water, and a climate that is generally favorable for food production. Its economies are also among the ones that are the fastest growing globally. Despite this, the region has the greatest rate of food insecurity globally, partly as a result of its government's failure to do their bit. Nelson Agyemang, vice president of the Ghana Cooperative for Agricultural Producers, stated at a recent agriculture conference in Cape Town that political will is the main reason for Africa's food insecurity. He also mentioned that they lack effective leadership that recognizes that investing in agriculture will contribute to an overall reduction in poverty. Famine and hunger persist throughout the African continent, particularly in the Sahel and Horn of Africa. Even though 70% of Africans are employed as farmers, according to the UN's 2012 Human Development Report, 1 in 4 individuals in sub-Saharan Africa suffer from undernourishment, and every third child has stunted growth. Agriculturally dependent countries are the most severely affected by food insecurity, despite popular opinion. This is because 90% of Africa's food supply comes from smallholder farmers. Additionally, half of them experience food insecurity as a result of their low productivity. By 2050, it is predicted that Africa's population will have quadrupled, adding 1.1 billion more people to the continent's food needs and exacerbating existing problems. Mary Munane, coordinator of the Kenyan cooperative Land O'Lakes, predicts that by 2050, there won't be enough productive land to feed the growing population. Food insecurity has numerous causes. These include crop failure due to droughts and floods, HIV, poverty, and war. However, analysts claim that weak institutions and poor policies are the main causes of starvation. Tegene Getu, the regional director for Africa for the UN's development program, stated that decades of poor governance stem from chronic food insecurity in sub-Saharan Africa. Several African governments promoted other businesses by macroeconomic support, subsidies, and other incentives, pushing agriculture to the periphery. Because of this poor governance, the majority of sub-Saharan countries have seen stagnating food systems, crumbling rural infrastructure, and slow farming. In Africa, rainfall is still the primary source of water for 95% of agriculture. Formerly known as Africa's breadbasket, Zimbabwe is a prime example. Zimbabwe has suffered with food insecurity ever since a continuous land reform in 2000 turned the country's once prosperous industrialized agriculture sector into one that is mostly devoted to subsistence farming. The Minister of Small and Medium Enterprise Development for Zimbabwe, Sithembiso Nyoni, stated that we have been going through difficult economic times. Partitioning the petite cake that is produced has proven to be somewhat difficult. Nyoni claims that the government of Zimbabwe has historically given education a lot of weight in terms of development. However, according to Francois Kanimba, Rwanda's Minister of Trade and Industry, the nation intends to spend $235 million on rural redevelopment, with a focus on agriculture, with the goal of providing irrigation to 40% of its farmers over the course of the next 5 years. So how does colonialism fit in? In 2021, 3 Australia professors wrote an essay published on the conversation that, although climate and geology play a role, the real cause is the lasting effects of colonialism. They argue that African farmers prior to colonization cultivated resilient crops that coexisted peacefully with the environment and were attuned to the various ecological categories present on the continent. Colonialism brought about a new agricultural paradigm that upset this equilibrium. Producing export goods like cotton, cocoa, and tea took up land and labor that could have been used to grow food. According to some analysts, colonialism had an impact on Africa. However, the assertion is also meaningless because it assigns external responsibility for even the present issues that Africans face. Despite the invasion of numerous East and South Asian countries, very few of them face food insecurity. The claim put forth by groups such as the World Resource Institute that developed nation agricultural subsidies lessen African farmers' capacity to produce food by distorting the international food market serves as an alternative to this line of reasoning. In addition, the markets most impacted by these subsidies are usually non-food ones, like sugar and cotton. The main imported foods consumed in Africa are rice, maize, and wheat, which are usually imported from countries like Brazil, India, and Ukraine that do not provide any assistance to its farmers. Another argument is that smallholder farms in Africa are inefficient and uncompetitive. This makes sense as well. Large farms are more prevalent in countries where the agricultural sector is well established and very productive. Now, let me tell you a shocking fact. African nations generate food, but not for their own consumption. While wheat and rice, the staple foods of the African diet, are mainly imported, a significant amount of Africa's farmlands are used to grow export-orientated crops like coffee, cocoa, and cottonseed oil. The World Bank claims that the majority of this imported food may actually be grown locally. Furthermore, replacing imported cereal with domestic crops will boost African countries' level of self-sufficiency. These goods may be traded between African countries, given their youth vital work and income for their farms. Additionally, the crops would serve as the cornerstone of a healthful diet. Pauline Chivenge, a researcher at the African Plant Nutrition Institute in Morocco, mentioned that indigenous crops might offer far more nutritious options to the cereals already in use. Their advantages extend beyond maintaining food security. They tend to be more nutrition-dense, meaning they provide greater levels of protein and vitamins as well as the required number of calories. But for many years, local crops have been disregarded, mostly because multinational companies and governments have promoted the mass production of wheat and maize as staple foods. The production of maize, rice, and wheat in large monocrop fields has actually been the focus of automation, research, and development, to the detriment of the biodiversity of the area. Nonetheless, growing cereals like wheat and maize is not particularly feasible in most of Africa's water-scarce areas. They mostly depend on regular rainfall, which is getting harder as a result of climate change. Now, you must be wondering whether African smallholder farmers use their crops to feed the continent. Well, Wolfgang Bockermann, who is a food and agricultural economist at the Humboldt University in Berlin, believes that local products are neglected. From 2015 to 2018, he oversaw a study on Kenya's domestic production and consumption of many native vegetables. The vegetables we studied had previously fallen out of fashion and used to be known as the poor man's food, due to dominance of the foreign produce that colonization brought to Kenya, Beckelman said. The environment and human health are not the only advantages of using indigenous foods. Indigenous crops may improve communities that are marginalized, notably female farmers. Numerous varieties of crops can be grown rapidly in home greenhouses on the outskirts of towns. Due to the continuous trend of people moving from rural to urban regions, a collection of small native crop farms can provide an imported source of food for the expanding population of slums and marginal cities in Africa. So, what are the challenges? Actually, there are a number of obstacles in the way of increasing the production of native crops. Because the smallholder farms who cultivate them have limited access to fertilizers, their output is modest. They also lack the equipment needed to distribute and prepare the food they gather, and most intra-African markets do not provide quick delivery of fresh, uncooked food. Additionally, it is difficult for African countries to switch to cultivating their own crops when it is more advantageous to export cash crops to developed countries. This is due to the fact that the African countries are forced to choose between encouraging small-scale cultivation of local foods and mass-producing goods for export, which raises their market value in order to feed a sizable selection of their population. Some experts claim that larger monoculture farms are much more productive because they are easier to manage and automate. Another reason for bulk crops is their ease of transportation and marketing. Proponents of mass cultivation of exportable crops claim that it gives African nations economic power in the global market and contributes to the modernization and development of African agriculture. However, with worldwide food supplies in threat due to the conflict in Ukraine, manufacturing and distributing will have to shift. It was previously believed to be an excellent plan to create a worldwide interconnected marketplace where each country imports what it demands from other countries and exports what it can best provide. Considering what we've just discussed, the problems of food security in Africa can be easily solved with economic expansion and education. Fortunately, both of these are headed in the right direction. As African economies expand and farming is perceived less as a bad destiny for illiterate farmers and more as a genuine, proficient desire for educated people who have better access to capital and expertise, the sector will gradually become more skilled. Productivity will rise as a result, and labor requirements will drop. Africa will someday produce more food than the continent can consume due to a smaller number of better trained farmers. Furthermore, the last barrier to food security of the African continent will be eliminated as governments construct highways and other essential infrastructure. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons to receive more content. See you in the next video.